The show struggled because it never defined Boba Fett's purpose within its own narrative. For decades, his identity was shaped by efficiency, mystery, and intimidation, and viewers expected a series that explored his methods and the criminal landscape of the galaxy. But instead, the story presented a protagonist unsure of his role, unsure of his motivation, and unsure of his direction within the plot. The narrative pacing revealed the lack of structural planning. Instead of beginning with momentum in the present day, the show spent most of its early runtime inside flashbacks that explained how Boba survived and what he did afterward, leaving the main story without a driving threat or objective. Viewers watched Boba wander the desert while the plot waited off-screen. The show removed conflict by making every faction strangely agreeable. When Boba announced that he would rule with respect, major syndicates offered no real resistance and no political pushback. Without pressure, focused stakes, or organised opposition, the narrative eliminated tension, removing the friction that a story about territory and power requires. The writing shifted agency away from Boba and handed control to supporting characters. In episodes where a problem emerged, Fennec Shand strategized the solution, Din Djarin executed key actions, and Grogu received the emotional beats. The series sidelined its own lead and turned him into a passive figure, observing other people's arcs. The shift in tonal identity hurt the show's cohesion. Marketing framed the story as a crime saga, where Boba would take control of the underworld, but the execution leaned into quiet introspection and slow-paced reflection. A genre built on aggression, deception, and ambition was replaced by a gentle portrait of a man searching for purpose. Flashbacks replaced progression. Instead of revealing information that heightened present-day stakes, the series treated the past as a narrative priority. These scenes lacked urgency and prevented viewers from investing in the current conflict. The plot stalled every time Boba returned to the Bacta tank. The series removed the qualities that made Boba intimidating. By showing him vulnerable, unsure, and frequently defeated in minor confrontations, the script reframed him as inexperienced. A character once defined by precision became reactive, constantly adjusting to circumstances instead of controlling them. The show struggled with world building because it never explored the structure of Tatooine's criminal ecosystem. A crime narrative depends on power struggles, alliances, betrayal, and strategic leverage. Instead of mapping territory control or showing how syndicates operate, the show reduced crime to random street encounters. The storytelling lacked thematic continuity. A story about a bounty hunter becoming a ruler should track how power reshapes identity, but the show avoided examining whether Boba was capable of doing what leadership required. Without internal conflict or external resistance, the arc had no tension. The story replaced stakes with cameos. The arrival of legacy characters shifted attention away from Boba and redirected narrative investment to other franchises. Instead of deepening Boba's personal journey, the show used familiar characters to generate interest in unrelated storylines. The show consistently avoided consequences. When choices have no cost, arcs cannot develop. Instead of forcing Boba to confront the ethics of ruling a criminal landscape, the script reinforced the idea that everyone would simply accept his authority without challenge. Character motivation remained unclear. Boba said he wanted to rule because he was tired of working for those who lacked competence, but the show never examined what ruling meant to him or why this goal carried emotional or philosophical value. Without motive, actions lose meaning. The finale demonstrated the structural flaws. Conflicts resolved through convenience rather than progression. Instead of executing strategy or negotiation, the climax relied on spectacle and external help. Boba Fett did not win a kingdom. He merely survived a confrontation. The show proved that reinvention without direction creates narrative emptiness. Boba Fett was rewritten into a character searching for identity, yet the writing never gave him a journey that justified his change. The result was a story without stakes and a protagonist without purpose. A stronger version of the show would start by defining the core premise. Instead of opening with Boba wandering the desert and accepting a throne without motive, the story should have established a clear reason why he wants power and what ruling means to him. A narrative gains strength when the protagonist acts toward a defined objective, not when the story tries to find purpose after the fact. The show needed a visible criminal hierarchy. A crime saga requires competition, structure, and leverage. Mos Espa could have been split into multiple economic districts, each controlled by a different syndicate with conflicting business interests, forcing Boba to negotiate, manipulate, and strategize to gain influence. Without power dynamics, there is no crime story. Boba should have earned territory through strategic wins, not through assumptions. Instead of walking into the palace and declaring rulership, he could have secured territory piece by piece by dismantling rival networks or making alliances. A story about power becomes meaningful only when power is acquired through effort, risk, and consequence, not by default. The show needed to challenge Boba morally. If he wanted to rule with respect, the narrative should have forced him to confront what that means in a city built on fear. A true crime story works when the protagonist is pressured to compromise his ethics, weigh cost against principle, and make decisions that reveal character. Without temptation, there is no growth. Flashbacks should have influenced the present narrative instead of replacing it. Time with the Tuskens could have given Boba a reason to rule, to protect the vulnerable and reshape systems that exploit others. Instead, the flashbacks functioned as a separate story, disconnected from the larger narrative, and failed to inform his decisions as a leader. The show needed a central antagonist who embodied everything Boba rejected. A crime narrative gains power when the villain mirrors the hero's internal conflict. A rival crime lord who represents the ruthless version of Boba would have forced him to confront what ruling actually requires. Without a meaningful rival, there is no thematic tension. Failure should have been part of Boba's transformation. Characters evolve when their beliefs are tested and when attempts to lead backfire. Losing territory, losing trust, or losing allies would reveal what Boba values. Instead, the story insulated him from risk and removed the struggle that defines a leader's rise to power. Din Djarin's arrival should have been reserved for the moment when their goals intersected. A supporting character overshadowed the protagonist because the show shifted emotional focus away from Boba. Using Din for one pivotal episode would have reinforced the idea that Boba is part of a larger world without allowing someone else to carry his story for him. The narrative should have shown economic and political stakes. Crime stories involve resource control, supply chains, and influence. Instead of simple street fights, the show could have explored spice routes, territory taxation, or the impact of crime on civilians. World building gives power meaning. Without it, territory becomes just a backdrop. Agency needed to remain with Boba. Every choice should have originated from him, not from Fennec or Din. When side characters solve problems or form plans, the audience implicitly learns that the protagonist is not driving the narrative. A successful character arc requires decisions, consequences, and progression initiated by the lead. The show could have used loyalty as a strategic asset. Boba is respected by bounty hunters, smugglers, and mercenaries across the Outer Rim. Instead of creating a static team early on, the show could have explored how Boba builds a network of allies who follow him not out of fear, but because they gain something from partnership. Influence is a currency. The finale should have resolved long-term conflict, not short-term action. The battle in Mos Espa centered on spectacle rather than narrative payoff. A stronger ending would show Boba gaining legitimacy, establishing order, and reshaping the criminal ecosystem, demonstrating that leadership is defined by decisions rather than by shooting the final blaster bolt. The season needed lasting consequences. Power should change Boba. For better or worse, characters define themselves by what they are willing to sacrifice for their goals. By protecting Boba from cost, the show prevented growth and robbed him of narrative weight. A story without consequence cannot produce transformation. The show could have answered its own central question: who is Boba Fett without the armor? The audience expected the series to explore that identity. Instead, the story became about reclaiming a title rather than discovering a self. A better version reveals that identity is built through intention, sacrifice, and choice, not through reputation.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.